There are stories that seem too painful to be real, stories of endurance that defy belief. The story of Timor Leste is one of them. It's a tiny island nation, a place you might struggle to find on a map. Yet, its people have lived through some of the darkest chapters of modern history. They faced centuries of colonial rule. They endured a brutal 24-year occupation. They survived what many have called a genocide. And somehow, against all odds, they emerged. They held on to their identity, their culture, and their unshakable dream of freedom. This isn't just a story about politics or war, it's a story about the raw, stubborn, and incredible strength of the human spirit. You have to wonder what it takes for a community to withstand such immense pressure. How does a culture survive when outside forces are determined to erase it? For the Timorese people, the answer seems to lie in a deep, almost spiritual connection to their land and their heritage. They are a people forged in resistance. Every mountain, every village holds a story of defiance. Every family has a memory of loss, but also of courage. Their journey to independence was not a straight line. It was a winding, painful road littered with setbacks and unimaginable suffering. But it was a road they refused to abandon, driven by a collective will that simply would not break. We often think of history in terms of grand battles and powerful leaders, but the real story of Timor-Leste is found in the quiet moments of resilience. It's in the songs sung in secret, the traditions passed down from one generation to the next. It's in the quiet determination of a farmer tending his crops while soldiers patrol nearby. It's in the brave decision of a young person to join the resistance in the mountains. This small half-island, often overlooked by the world, became a crucible where the very essence of human dignity was tested. And in the end, it was that dignity that triumphed over tanks, guns, and systemic oppression. Today is June 18, 2025. Over 2 decades have passed since Timor-Leste officially raised its flag as a sovereign nation. The scars are still visible. The trauma lingers in the memories of those who lived through the occupation. Yet, there is an undeniable sense of hope in the air. You see it in the faces of the children playing in the streets of Dili, the capital. You hear it in the ambitions of the young students who are now the architects of their country's future. Their story is a powerful reminder that even after the longest night, the sun will eventually rise. It is a testament to a people who refuse to be forgotten. To understand the Timorese struggle, you have to go back. Way back. Long before any European ships appeared on the horizon, Timor was home to a mosaic of peoples. The first inhabitants were likely Austronesian migrants, who arrived thousands of years ago. They brought with them their own languages, their own spiritual beliefs, and a deep connection to the natural world. They saw the sacred in the mountains and the crocodiles. These ancient roots formed the bedrock of Timorese identity. It was a complex society of different kingdoms and clans, often in conflict with one another, but sharing a common island home. This was a world unto itself, rich in culture and tradition. Then, in the 16th century, everything changed. The Portuguese arrived, drawn by the scent of sandalwood. This fragrant wood was like gold at the time, and Timor had it in abundance. The Portuguese didn't launch a full-scale invasion at first. Instead, they established trading posts along the coast. They brought with them Catholicism, which slowly began to weave itself into the fabric of Timorese life. For centuries, Portuguese rule was distant and neglectful. They were more interested in extracting resources than in developing the island. For most Timorese people living in the rugged interior, life continued much as it had before, with their own local rulers and traditions remaining strong. This long period of neglect had a strange effect. It allowed a unique Timorese Portuguese identity to form, especially among the coastal elite. But it also meant that Timor-Leste remained incredibly underdeveloped. There were few schools, hardly any roads, and limited healthcare. The Portuguese saw Timor as a remote outpost, a place of exile. They did little to unite the island or build a sense of national consciousness. Yet resistance was always simmering just beneath the surface. Throughout the centuries, various Timorese kingdoms rose up against the colonial authorities, determined to protect their autonomy. These uprisings were often brutally suppressed, but they kept the spirit of independence alive. The 20th century brought more turmoil. During World War II, the island became a battleground. The Japanese invaded, and the Timorese people found themselves caught in a brutal conflict. They bravely assisted Australian commandos who were fighting a guerrilla war against the Japanese. They paid a terrible price for their loyalty. Tens of thousands of Timorese civilians died from fighting, famine, and disease. After the war, the Portuguese returned, but nothing was the same. The world was changing. The age of empire was ending. A new generation of Timorese thinkers began to dream of a future where they could control their own destiny. The seeds of modern nationalism had been planted. The trigger for change came from an unexpected place: Portugal itself. On April 25, 1974, a peaceful military coup known as the Carnation Revolution toppled the authoritarian regime in Lisbon. This event sent shockwaves across Portugal's colonial empire. The new government in Portugal wanted out. They declared their intention to grant independence to their colonies, including the forgotten outpost of East Timor. For the Timorese people, it was a moment of incredible hope and excitement. After nearly 500 years of foreign rule, freedom was finally within reach. Political parties emerged almost overnight, each with a different vision for the future. The two main parties were Frelimo and the UDT. Frelimo, the Revolutionary Front for an Independent East Timor, advocated for immediate and full independence. The UDT, or Timorese Democratic Union, initially favored a more gradual transition, perhaps in continued association with Portugal. A third party, Apodati, called for integration with Indonesia, but it had very little popular support. For a brief period, there was a vibrant political debate. People were talking, organizing, and imagining what their new nation could be. It was a heady, optimistic time, but this fragile dawn would not last long. The political climate quickly became tense and polarized. The situation was being watched closely by a powerful neighbor. Indonesia, under the authoritarian rule of President Suharto, had its own plans for East Timor. Suharto's anti-communist regime feared that an independent Timor Leste, led by the left-leaning Frelimo, could become a Cuba on its doorstep. Indonesia began a campaign of destabilization. They spread propaganda, armed factions, and stoked tensions between the Timorese political parties. This external pressure turned political disagreement into open conflict. In August 1975, a short but tragic civil war broke out between Frelimo and the UDT. Frelimo quickly gained the upper hand, and the UDT forces fled across the border into Indonesian West Timor. With Portugal having effectively abandoned its responsibilities, and with Indonesian forces massing on the border, Frelimo was left in a desperate position. On November 28, 1975, they made a unilateral declaration of independence. For 9 days, the Democratic Republic of East Timor existed as a sovereign, albeit unrecognized nation. It was a brief, defiant moment of freedom, but the shadow of invasion loomed large. On December 7, 1975, just over a week later, Indonesia launched a full-scale land, sea, and air invasion of East Timor. The capital, Dili, was overwhelmed. The painful road to freedom had just led to a dead end, and a 24-year nightmare was about to begin. The Indonesian invasion was swift and brutal. Paratroopers descended on Dili, and warships shelled the coast. What followed was a period of unimaginable violence and repression. The Indonesian military, known as the TNI, saw the Timorese people not as neighbors to be integrated but as an enemy to be crushed. In the first few years of the occupation, entire villages were destroyed. Famine, both man-made and a consequence of the war, swept through the countryside. It's estimated that up to 200,000 people, nearly a third of the population, died from fighting, starvation, and disease. It was a period of intense, systematic violence that the outside world chose, for the most part, to ignore. In the face of this overwhelming force, the Timorese spirit of resistance did not die. It simply retreated into the mountains. Frelimo's armed wing, Falintil, became the heart of the armed resistance. Led by figures like the charismatic Zanana Gusmao, these guerrilla fighters waged a lonely, desperate war against a vastly superior enemy. They were poorly armed, often hungry, and completely cut off from the outside world. Yet, for more than 2 decades, they kept the flame of resistance alive. Their struggle was more than just a military campaign. It was a powerful symbol for the Timorese people that they had not been defeated. It was a statement that Timor Leste was not, and would never be, just another Indonesian province. Life under Indonesian occupation was a life of fear. A network of spies and informants meant that no one could be trusted. Disappearances, torture, and extrajudicial killings were commonplace. The Indonesian government tried to win hearts and minds by building some infrastructure like roads and schools, but this was overshadowed by a policy of Indonesianization. The Timorese language was suppressed in schools, replaced by Bahasa Indonesia. The culture was systematically undermined. Thousands of Indonesians were moved into Timor Leste to dilute the local population. It was a multifaceted strategy designed to erase Timorese identity and absorb the territory completely into Indonesia. But the resistance was not just fought with guns in the mountains. It was fought in the towns and villages, in the churches, and in the hearts of ordinary people. The Catholic Church, once a symbol of Portuguese colonialism, became a sanctuary for the Timorese people and a vocal critic of the occupation. Leaders like Bishop Carlos Felipe Jimenez Belo provided moral and spiritual support, documenting human rights abuses and speaking out on the world stage. Clandestine networks of students and activists worked in secret, gathering information and organizing protests. It was this combination of armed, diplomatic, and civic resistance that sustained the struggle through its darkest years. For most of the occupation, the world looked away. Western governments, including the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom, quietly supported Indonesia for strategic and economic reasons. They sold weapons to Suharto's regime, and accepted the narrative that East Timor was an internal Indonesian matter. But slowly, things began to change. Exiled Timorese activists, like José Ramos Horta, worked tirelessly to bring their country's plight to the world's attention. They lobbied politicians, spoke at the United Nations, and kept the story alive in the international media. Their persistence began to pay off, chipping away at the wall of international indifference. The event that truly shocked the world's conscience occurred on November 12, 1991, during a funeral procession for a slain pro-independence activist. Indonesian troops opened fire on a crowd of peaceful demonstrators at the Santa Cruz Cemetery in Dili. Hundreds of unarmed men, women, and children were killed. Crucially, the massacre was filmed by a British journalist, Max Stahl. His footage was smuggled out of the country and broadcast around the world. For the first time, people could see with their own eyes the brutality of the occupation. The Santa Cruz massacre became a turning point. It galvanized international solidarity movements and put immense pressure on governments to act. The pressure continued to build throughout the 1990s. In 1996, Bishop Belo and José Ramos Horta were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their non-violent struggle for justice. This brought enormous international prestige to the Timorese cause. Then, in 1998, another unexpected event changed everything: the Asian financial crisis. The crisis destabilized Suharto's regime, and he was forced to resign after decades in power. His successor, B.J. Habibie, was more open to reform. In a surprising move, Habibie announced that he would allow the people of East Timor to vote on their future. They would be offered a choice: autonomy within Indonesia or complete independence. The United Nations stepped in to organize the referendum, which was set for August 30, 1999. It was a moment of incredible hope, but also of extreme danger. The Indonesian military, unwilling to let go of the territory, began to organize and arm local anti-independence militias. These militias, backed by the TNI, unleashed a wave of terror across the country. They intimidated, attacked, and killed pro-independence supporters in an attempt to scare people into voting for autonomy. Despite the violence, on the day of the vote, the Timorese people turned out in overwhelming numbers. With incredible courage, 98.6% of the registered voters cast their ballots. The result was announced a few days later. A staggering 78.5% had voted for independence. The vote for independence was a moment of pure joy, but it was immediately followed by a furious and bloody backlash. The pro-Indonesian militias and the TNI went on a final destructive rampage. It was a scorched earth campaign designed to punish the Timorese people for their choice. They systematically destroyed everything in their path. Buildings were burned to the ground. Homes were looted. Infrastructure was demolished. Hundreds of thousands of people were forcibly displaced, many herded across the border into West Timor. At least 1,400 more Timorese were killed in the weeks following the referendum. Dili was left in ruins, a ghost town shrouded in smoke. Faced with a humanitarian catastrophe and intense international outrage, the Indonesian government finally agreed to allow an international peacekeeping force to enter the country. In September 1999, the Australian-led Interfet Force arrived. Their mission was to restore order and end the violence. The arrival of the UN peacekeepers was a moment of profound relief for the Timorese people. It marked the end of the Indonesian occupation after 24 long years. The soldiers were greeted as liberators, but the task ahead was monumental. The country was in ruins. There was no functioning government, no police force, no judicial system. The nation had to be built from scratch. The United Nations Transitional Administration in East Timor, or UNTAID, was established to govern the territory during its transition to independence. It was one of the most ambitious nation-building projects the UN had ever undertaken. The challenges were immense. They had to repatriate hundreds of thousands of refugees, disarm militias, and establish security. They had to create a civil service, write a constitution, and organize the country's first democratic elections. All of this had to be done in a society deeply traumatized by decades of violence and poverty. It was a slow, difficult process filled with setbacks and frustrations. Despite the enormous challenges, the Timorese people, in partnership with the international community, began the slow process of rebuilding. A constituent assembly was elected in 2001 to draft the new constitution. In April 2002, Xanana Gusmao, the former resistance leader, was elected as the country's first president. Finally, on May 20, 2002, in a moving ceremony attended by world leaders, the UN flag was lowered, and the flag of Timor Leste was raised. After centuries of struggle, the Democratic Republic of Timor Leste was officially born. It was the end of one long, painful chapter, and the beginning of a new one, filled with both promise and uncertainty. How does a nation survive when so much has been taken away? For Timor Leste, the answer lies in its soul, its unique culture, its deep-seated faith, and the resilience of its people. Throughout the occupation, Indonesian authorities tried to impose their own language and customs, but the Timorese people clung fiercely to their own. They continued to speak Tetum and the dozens of other local languages in their homes and communities. These languages were more than just a means of communication. They were a shield against assimilation, a way of preserving a distinct identity in the face of immense pressure. The Catholic Church also played a crucial role. What began as a colonial institution transformed into a symbol of national identity and resistance. During the occupation, the church became one of the only safe spaces where people could gather and express themselves. It provided not only spiritual comfort, but also a practical network for organizing and disseminating information. The church's use of the Tetum language in its services helped to elevate it from a local dialect to a national language of unity. This shared faith became a powerful binding agent, giving people a sense of solidarity and hope when they had little else. Timorese culture is also expressed through art, music, and stories. The traditional ties, a form of hand-woven textile, is more than just a piece of cloth. Each pattern tells a story representing a particular family, clan, or region. During the occupation, weaving a ties was a quiet act of defiance, a way of keeping ancestral traditions alive. Stories of brave ancestors and mythical figures were passed down orally, reinforcing a sense of history and pride that stretched back long before any colonizers arrived. These cultural touchstones were vital lifelines, connecting the present generation to their past and giving them the strength to fight for their future. Today, as Timor-Leste navigates the complexities of the 21st century, this cultural pride remains its greatest asset. The nation faces significant challenges. Economic development is a slow and difficult process, heavily reliant on oil and gas revenues that will not last forever. Building stable democratic institutions takes time, but the resilience that saw the country through its darkest days is now being channeled into building a better future. The youth of Timor-Leste, who have no memory of the occupation, are now coming of age. They are educated, connected to the world, and full of ambition. They are the living embodiment of their country's painful but ultimately triumphant journey. Their courage is the final, powerful testament to a small island that refused to be broken.